the Defence Staff report to?
The Honourable Minister.
The Chief of Defence Staff reports to me.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Who approves the senior military appointments, particularly the Chief of the Air Staff, Maritime Staff, Land Staff, and the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, the appointments are approved by the Chief of Defence Staff. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Is it the responsibility of all members of the Canadian Forces who serve in uniform to be free from real or perceived partisanship and political engagement?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, when it comes to everything the Canadian Armed Forces, they always work in a very professional manner, and they serve us very well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Who does the Deputy Minister of the Department of National Defence report to?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, the Deputy Minister reports to the Minister of National Defence. That's me.
The Honourable Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
What authority does the Deputy Minister have over senior military personnel, specifically generals and admirals?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, the Chief of Defence Staff has the sole responsibility, administration and command of the Canadian Armed Forces and all the personnel below that position. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
The question was the Deputy Minister, not the Chief of the Defence Staff. The Deputy Minister over military personnel.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying to answer the question, talking about military personnel. That comes under the command of the Chief of Defence Staff, the Deputy Minister in charge of the Department of National Defence and all the civilian personnel.
Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Would you consider an issue that ultimately results in a 3-star general being removed from duty in the Canadian Forces and charged by the RCMP for breach of trust a serious issue? Yes or no?
The Honourable Member for Aurora, the Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, when it comes to the process as we talked about, it has been completely independent from the beginning to this time. And as we stated, this has been confirmed by the prosecution and defence as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Chief of the Defence Staff was briefed by the RCMP on their investigation into Admiral Norman. Under what authority was he briefed about an supposedly independent ongoing investigation?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, I believe those questions were answered by the Chief of Defence Staff when he was a witness at the trial. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
The Minister said that the Chief of the Defence Staff reports to him, and therefore he should be able to answer the questions about the Chief of the Defence Staff. On the 9th of January 2017, did the Chief of the Defence Staff brief yourself, Katie Telford, Jerry Butts, on the RCMP investigation?
The Honourable Minister of Defence.
Mr. Chair, I was made aware of the investigation, and a decision was made by the Chief of Defence Staff at that, and I agreed. I supported that decision. Thank you.
Just before we go any further, I just want to remind the Honourable Member to address her questions through the Chair, not directly to the Minister. The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did the Minister take notes, and is it customary for a Chief of Defence Staff and the Minister of National Defence and two most senior staff of the Prime Minister's office to not take notes at a meeting to discuss a serious issue?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, when it comes to important things like this, I want to make absolutely clear, which has been stated, the process has been completely independent from the investigation all the way through the judicial process, and that's exactly what has happened here. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Mr. Chair, the question was, since the Minister was briefed, did he take notes at that briefing with the Chief of Defence Staff, Katie Telford, and Jerry Butts on the RCMP investigation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, I was briefed on this while I was in Vancouver through a phone call with the Deputy Minister at that time and the Chief of Defence Staff. I was made aware of the investigation, and I supported the Chief of Defence Staff's decision. Thank you.
Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Under what authority were two unelected partisan staffers who are not in the chain of command briefed on this matter?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, I don't understand the question that the member is asking here.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Mr. Chair, the minister said that all military personnel must be free from real or perceived partisanship. So my question is, how, on the matter of Admiral Norman's RCMP investigation, were two unelected partisan staffers from the Prime Minister's office who are not in the chain of command involved in this conversation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, as I stated, when it came to the investigation, I was briefed through a phone call while I was in Vancouver by the Chief of Defence Staff and the Deputy Minister at that time. I can only talk about what my actions were in this case here, and I believe the member is asking when I was briefed. And I've answered that question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
So the minister, I believe, is indicating that he has no responsibility for the other people and the authority with which other people are engaged in a call of this nature of serious matter. I would like to ask him one more time, how is it that if a random person from the street or someone from some other country were involved on this call, would it not be his responsibility to ensure why they were? So the question, Mr. Chair, is under what authority were two unelected partisan staff members on a call about Admiral Norman's RCMP investigation?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
First of all, the entire process has been independent. As I stated, I was on a call with the Chief of Defence Staff and the Deputy Minister directly to me while I was in Vancouver. Those are the three people that were actually on that call. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Mr. Chair, on the 9th of January 2017, this Chief of the Defence Staff spoke with the Prime Minister on the matter of Admiral Norman's investigation. Was the minister also on this call?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, I was not on that call. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
As the Chief of the Defence Staff reports to the Minister, Mr. Chair, was the Chief of the Defence Staff briefed the Minister after the call with the Prime Minister?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, I was informed, as I stated, through a phone call of the investigation that had started. Recommendation was the decision that was made by the Chief of Defence Staff at that time, which I supported, and the Deputy Minister was on that same call. Thank you.
The Honourable Member.
In what capacity was the Deputy Minister, Mr. Chair, on that call, recognizing that the Minister has already told us that the Deputy Minister does not have administrative control over military personnel?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, the former Deputy Minister was on that call in National Defence while we worked together, myself as the Minister of National Defence, very, very closely with the Deputy Minister and the Chief of Defence Staff. That's how we work, and we've been working extremely well together, Mr. Chair, to making sure that we serve the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Again, under what authority was the former Deputy Minister involved, considering that this was a disciplinary matter around the senior military official for which the former Deputy Minister had no administrative control?
The Honourable Minister of Defence.
Mr. Chair, in National Defence, we work very closely. The Minister of National Defence works very closely with the Deputy Minister and with the Chief of Defence Staff. When we come together, when it comes to the decision that needs to be made, we work together, because at the end of
the Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges Richmond Hill.
Did the Minister or the CDS consult the Judge Advocate General prior to the suspension of Admiral Norman on 13 January 2017?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, if this is going to be try to play, she wants to play like the member wants to play like a lawyer, you will have to talk to then the other person who's asking the question about. Happy to answer the question about myself, and as I stated, I have been on the received a phone call while I was in Vancouver by the Deputy Minister and the Chief of Defence Staff to inform me of the investigation and the decision. Thank you.
Well, member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Was it the minister's decision to deny financial legal assistance to Admiral Norman on this matter?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, as I stated before, the decision for this was made by the former Deputy Minister as the criteria was not met. And now that the situation has changed, the criteria has changed, and have authorized the reimbursement.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Did the reason given stating that Admiral Norman was guilty and that's why he was not entitled to financial assistance not prejudice his presumption of innocence before his day in court?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, it is very important to note here, when an investigation by police is launched, is to keep making sure that we maintain the independence. That's exactly what has happened here, confirmed by the prosecution and by defense, including through the judicial process. Mr. Chair, thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
When will the minister publicly acknowledge the former Vice Chief of the Defence Staff's innocence and reinstate him as the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff?
The Honourable Minister.
Chair, in our democracy, it's our courts that makes those decisions. As the Minister of National Defence, to have the responsibility for that we have the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces have all the tools necessary. Thank you.
The Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Actual fact, Mr. Chair, QRNO 101.09, para 6, states that once the reason for the suspension of the military member is no longer valid, he will be reinstated to his former position.
Hear, hear.
So I'd like a comment from the minister on why the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff has not been reinstated to his position.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, as I've stated many times before, the Chief of Defence Staff is responsible for all the personnel in the Canadian Armed Forces. Chief of Defence Staff will meet with Admiral Norman to talk about the next steps, and the decision will be made. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
So, Mr. Chair, if the Chief of the Defence Staff reports to the Minister of National Defence, is the Minister of National Defence not accountable to every citizen and every member in uniform to ensure that he carries out his duties in accordance with the Queen's regulations and orders?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister.
Chair, in accordance with the National Defence Act, we respect the Chief of Defence Staff authority that has been given to this position. And the Chief of Defence Staff has the responsibility for administration and command of the Canadian Armed Forces, and that's what I respect. And that military advice and how our system works is very important to making sure that we function as a government and as a country, it's so that we can respect our Canadian Armed Forces. And doing anything less is not wise. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Chair, this is probably the most fundamental point of this entire conversation. Our democracy is based on the fact that a standing army is accountable to the elected official, so that Canadians can trust that our military is not running rogue, is totally accountable to what the will of citizens has decided, and that's why the National Defence Act has the Chief of the Defence Staff reporting directly to the Minister of National Defence. If the Minister of National Defence is not going to assume his responsibility for ensuring the Chief of Defence Staff behaves in accordance with the National Defence Act, then I would like to understand from the Minister what precisely he thinks his role is.
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, I completely disagree with the insinuations that the member is making.
Hear, hear.
Our Canadian Armed Forces are extremely professional. I have respect for the Chief of Defence Staff position as the authority that has been given by the National Defence Act for the Chief of Defence Staff. No, our military does not run rogue. Our Chief of Defence Staff and all the personnel work in the highest professional manner. Mr. Chair, I mean, we see it from domestic operations. We see it on international operations. I have faith in the Chief of Defence Staff to carry out his duties, Mr. Chair, and I'll be honest with you, it is hurtful to hear this type of talk and insinuation that the military is running road, considering the tremendous work our women and men do for us, not only in Canada, but around the world. Thank you.
Reprise du débat, resuming debate, l'honorable député de Marc-Aurèle-Fortin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais contribuer au débat d'aujourd'hui en parlant pendant 10 minutes de ce que nos hommes et nos femmes militaires font au nom des Canadiens ici au pays. La première obligation du gouvernement est d'assurer la sécurité des Canadiens. Qu'il s'agisse d'aider les collectivités lors de catastrophes naturelles, de mener des opérations de recherche et de sauvetage ou d'affirmer la souveraineté du Canada dans l'Arctique, les Forces armées canadiennes sont prêtes à aider. Et tout au long de ces opérations, le ministère de la Défense nationale et les Forces armées canadiennes sont les gardiens responsables de l'environnement. Nous n'avons qu'à constater plus tôt ce mois-ci, voir comment les Forces armées canadiennes aident les collectivités d'un bout à l'autre du Canada. Lorsque l'Ontario, le Québec et le Nouveau-Brunswick ont été inondés, alors que les maisons des gens étaient à risque et que les infrastructures essentielles étaient menacées par la montée des eaux, les provinces ont demandé l'aide des Forces armées canadiennes. Plus de 2 000 marins